Welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Banner Monday, where we kick off each week by doing what IU fans love more than anything else, talking hoops. IU hoops, Big Ten hoops, deep dives into basketball strategy and concepts, plus previews of IU's upcoming opponent. We do it all here every Monday, and we are happy to have you here with us. This is our 7th edition of Banner Monday, and it is our 450th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the afternoon of Monday, December 3rd, 2018. I'm your host, Jerod Morris, and let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. And this one's pretty easy. The banner moment is Friday's unexpected tweet by Trayce Jackson-Davis that he will be attending Indiana. Now, to be clear, the announcement that he would go to Indiana, that wasn't unexpected. People thought for a long time like Indiana, was a big lean, or that Trayce was a big lean for Indiana, that Indiana would end up getting his commitment. But no one really expected it to come on Friday. It kind of came out of the blue. And, of course, then we later found out that he had also signed as well, which was very exciting. And you don't need me to explain the importance of keeping five-star big men from the state here at home. The last time it happened was Cody Zeller, and he ended up having, I would say, a pretty productive 2-year run at IU. And while no one player is going to be able to replace what Indiana loses with Juwan Morgan gone next year, you can't really do much better than bring in a talented potential Indiana Mr. Basketball / McDonald's All-American to replace him. And Trayce's commitment is just the latest example of Archie Miller succeeding with his inside-out recruiting strategy. 4-star guard Armon Franklin is also in the fold. And if fellow in-state 5-star Keon Brooks pops soon for Indiana too, as more and more people now expect that he will, then the class of 2019 will have 3 highly regarded players from the state of Indiana, just like the class of 2018 did. So, while Archie Miller has perhaps struggled more than some expected to get the current Hoosiers playing at a consistently high level on the court, he is certainly off to a great start in laying the recruiting foundation that he'll need to sustain success once he does get things really rolling. All right, and to my right today, it is no one. Ryan is a late scratch from the mailbag. He texted me about a half hour ago, said that he had to pick up his wonderful mother from the airport.
Held you in my womb for 9 months.
She did, and so when she calls needing a ride from the airport, Ryan has to be there. No issue with that, of course. So no Ryan today, although I do believe he will be here tomorrow night with Andy and with Coach for the postgame show. I won't be on the IU Penn State postgame show. Tomorrow is my wife's birthday, so that takes precedence. A few things in my life take precedence over IU basketball, as you all know, but I do always try and take it off if it falls on my wife's birthday on December 4th. So I will be off, but they will certainly have you covered. So I'll be here to answer the mailbag questions here in our first segment. Then we're going to do our Big Ten Roundup with Mike DeCourcy. Then Ben Ladner is back with Basketball 201. And then I've got a lot of stuff for an IU Penn State preview. This is a really interesting game. I dug into it earlier today, and I'm excited to share some of that with you. All right, now, before we get into this week's mailbag, and there's a lot of good questions to answer, I want to take a quick moment and ask you for a favor. And I think it's a pretty simple one. All I'm asking you to do is to kind of help us continue growing the show, to continue growing our reach among IU fans. Because, and then the reason we're asking you to do this is because the best audience members, the best future chat mobbers almost always come from referrals from current listeners. So if you get a chance between now and the Penn State game, please just share our show with a fellow IU friend or family member who you think might not have heard about us. And there are a lot of different ways that you can do this based on the preference for consuming online content of the person that you're sharing it with. You can send them our YouTube link, youtube.com/assemblycall. You can point them toward our website, assemblycall.com. You can suggest that they follow us on Twitter @assemblycall, or suggest that they subscribe to our email list or our podcast by going to assemblycall.com/subscribe. And please, make this a personal, specific recommendation. We love it when people send out tweets, that say, listen to the Assembly Call. Those are great. But the one-on-one, like sending someone an email and being like, hey, I listened to the Assembly Call, I really like it, you should check them out too, that increases the likelihood of it working and bringing in, another person that is going to listen to the show and hopefully be, a member of our chat or a member of our community, which is what we want to continue doing as we kind of build this global community of IU fans. So if you have that extra second or two, do that, and then please just drop me a line somewhere, email, Twitter, let me know that you recommended us, because I'd love to be able to say thank you to you for doing that. So if you get a chance, we would love to have you do that for us. So I appreciate it. All right, let's hop into the mailbag here, and before I do that, I do want to open up the YouTube page so that I can get some interaction here from the folks that are listening. So we got Aaron here, we got Jamil here, we got Sally here, Jay. Awesome to see you guys. Okay, so we had a really good question about a player comp for Ryan, and we've actually had this before, and I'll save it to get his answer to this question once he's on. But I struggle to think of a better comp for Ryan as a player than Will Sheehy. But I didn't see – that's really more of Ryan's personality. I never saw Ryan as a player, so I'll be interested to get his thoughts on that. We have this question from Robert. Why do you think Clifton Moore and Jake Forrester are not playing? I swear to you, anytime we put out a call for questions, we get this question. It is the same answer every single time. Clifton and Jake simply haven't earned it. They haven't earned Archie's trust. And while they looked good at Hoosier Hysteria and in exhibition games, big difference between that and then, playing on the road at Penn State or playing at Duke or playing against some of the better competition Indiana is playing. With the injury issues, it has seemed like there have been opportunities there, but they just clearly haven't earned it yet in practice. It doesn't mean that they won't in the future. It doesn't mean that neither guy, has a future in the program or any of those things. But I think we just need to wait and see if those guys end up earning their time. And if they do, they're going to get on the court. But I don't think it has anything more to do with that. Both guys have played, so you're not saving them for a red shirt. They've already played, so they can't red shirt. So it's none of that. So once they earn it in practice, clearly they will start getting on the court. Scott asks, what are people's thoughts on the 30 for 30 Last Days of Night show? Such a dichotomy to me of Knight's abilities, many good values, but unable to control himself and the impact to players. So I've talked about this a lot. We did an episode of Podcast on the Brink where we interviewed Robert Abbott, the guy who broke that story and who the documentary was kind of told from his perspective. We talked about it there. I thought Galen and Scott had a really nice conversation about this on Crimson Cast yesterday. And I would really recommend, if you're interested in getting kind of a nuanced view, I would listen to what Galen has to say there, because Galen was around then. He obviously has, encyclopedic knowledge in a lot of ways of IU basketball history, certainly, over the last 20 to 30 years. And so I thought those perspectives were really good. What I would say personally is, I thought it was a good documentary. I think it's a story that's worth telling. I understand why some people think that it's a little bit one-sided. I mean, I think you would need a series of 30-30 documentaries, probably 4 or 5 of them to fully tell the story of Bob Knight, all the good, all the bad. This happened to focus on a particular time in the Knight era that wasn't good. The end of it wasn't good, and the reasons why it ended were not good, and a lot of those were on Coach Knight. And obviously, the way that the university handled it, that wasn't good either. But I was really appreciative to get Neil Reed's side of the story. I thought the end of the documentary was, it was pretty emotional to watch. And so, I'm glad that part of the story got told. As long as I've said before and as Galen said on Crimson Cast, people take it within kind of a broader context of what was going on. And maybe that's the biggest issue with it that people have is, for someone who's not just, living and dying with IU basketball like we are, for the drive-by folks who just, pop in on that documentary or have heard about Bob Knight, and then that confirms every bad thing they've ever heard, especially, given, the further damage he's done to his reputation over the last 4 or 5 years by just being a cantankerous, angry, grudge-holding old man. I can see why you would be a little bit frustrated that it gives a one-sided view, and so I'm sympathetic to that. But, personally, as an IU fan, I got more out of it than I thought I would. So I guess that's what I would say about it, and I think it's worth watching. Okay, so that is from Scott. Thank you for sending those questions in. Next question here from Michael. So Michael says, Archie has not targeted a three-point shooter to my knowledge. Is that by design? And I take issue with this because Archie has targeted three-point shooters. And this question came in our IU basketball community. Jay Horry, who's often in the chat, often there, leaving really smart comments, reminded Michael that even just in this past recruiting class, you brought in Demezy Anderson, you brought in Evan Fitzner, both guys who are kind of known, like that was their main skill, is that they're three-point shooters. Obviously we haven't seen the shooting from Romeo Langford come around yet. Rob Finney was not known as a shooter type. And Jerome Hunter, we did hear that he was shooting very well in practice before he got hurt, but also known as more of a versatile player than just a shooter. Okay, but to the premise of this question, Demezy Anderson and Evan Fitzner, they were both shooters. You look at a guy like Darius Garland that Indiana targeted. He's a very, very good shooter, and Indiana was, pretty much all in on him. So they certainly targeted a three-point shooter there. I think in the class of 2019, it's a little bit odd because Keon Brooks and Trace Jackson Davis, 2 5-star guys, you were going to go all in on those guys no matter what their particular set of skills were. Neither one of those guys is necessarily known as a shooter. They're kind of better all-around players. Trace, an inside guy, Keon, a bouncy, versatile wing. Neither guy really known as a shooter, but Indiana did target Brandon Newman, and it was kind of down between Brandon Newman and Armaan Franklin. Franklin not as good of a shooter as Newman, but maybe a better overall player. Indiana ends up getting Franklin, and we will see then what else happens with the class of 2019. No one thinks that even if Keon Brooks commits soon, and you've got your 3 scholarships, and right now you project to have 3 scholarships for next year because Juwan's gone, Evan Fitzner will be gone, and Romeo's going to be gone. Indiana's not going to stop recruiting. I would imagine they'll continue to look at high school seniors in the class of 29, guys who might be spring commits, certainly the grad transfer market, because you never know when a transfer could happen or something, and that's not to predict that it will happen or speculate on who it might be, but this is college basketball, and that kind of thing can certainly happen. And so I think Indiana will certainly use that extra scholarship to target someone who can shoot the basketball, you would expect. And then in future classes, they're looking at guys who can shoot. Ethan Morton is a guy they've been recruiting for a while, not a knockdown shooter, but a solid shooter. They've been looking at Anthony Leal from Bloomington South, although they haven't offered a scholarship yet. His primary skill is that he's known as a shooter. Some of the other high-level guards they're looking at in the class of 2020 are shooters. So, look, Archie understands the value of shooting. He was a shooter himself. So I think, the class of 2019, there were shooters, or class of 2018, there were shooters. Class of 2019, we maybe haven't gotten that dead-eye shooter yet. There's some, I think, extenuating circumstances to that, but I think Archie has targeted and will continue to target three-point shooters here as we move forward. Question from Steven. Do you think that not having Jerome Hunter available in practices has had an effect on Justin Smith's growth? I don't really have any reason to believe that would be the case. He had, Jerome there to practice for a good while before he went out. And certainly the more talent that you have in practice, the better off that you're going to be. But with Justin, it feels like a confidence thing. And it feels like a, guy not quite comfortable with his role offensively type thing. And we talked about this last week on our Thursday night show. So, certainly if you want more in-depth discussion of this and you missed that show, I would listen to it. But he's known as a cerebral guy. It feels at times like he's overthinking things out there. I'm not sure that, having Jerome Hunter, not having Jerome Hunter would affect those types of things. But I wasn't in practice. I don't know the impact Jerome Hunter was having on Justin while he was in there. So I can't really, state that one way or the other. But it doesn't strike me as something that would be explicative of why Justin is struggling. But we certainly know that we need Justin to get going, and he's going to be a huge factor against Penn State, which I'll talk about here coming up in our IU Penn State preview. A question from the aforementioned Jay Horry. It looks like IU is pretty set at the moment on a 9-man rotation of Finney, Romeo, McBob, Justin Smith, Juwan Morgan, Devontae Green, Al Durham, Deron Davis, and Evan Fitzner, which, yeah, that makes sense. If and when Race Thompson comes back, does he crack the rotation on a regular basis? If so, whose minutes will he be taking? Yes, I think he will crack the rotation. Certainly in the beginning, I think it'll take him a little while. Coming back from a concussion, don't know what his conditioning will be like, so I think he would be eased into it. But once he's kind of back at full strength, I think he will crack the rotation. We all kind of figured that would be the case. But, in terms of whose minutes he would be taking, I think it could really be dependent on the game. There may be some games where he's a better fit than Deron Davis because there's not a back-to-the-basket big man, and you want a more mobile defender out there than Deron Davis. There may be some games where he needs to take Evan Fitzner because the offense is functioning fine and we're getting points, but we need someone who's maybe a more rugged defender or a more rugged rebounder than Evan Fitzner. And so Race would be the guy to come in there. There may be other games where Juwan Morgan is having some foul trouble, and again, you want a more mobile defender to be in there, and so you have a guy like Race Thompson. So I think it could be dependent on just on some matchups, on kind of the flow of the game, and then obviously on foul trouble, who's in foul trouble, and that kind of thing. And also what he's able to bring to the table offensively. That's kind of what we don't really know right now. We know that he projects as this kind of rugged defender type. That's what Archie has talked about. But he is a guy who's supposed to have a face-up game. We just haven't had a chance to see it yet. So it'll be easier to answer that question once we see him play more. But I do think he'll get in, and then whose minutes he takes are just going to be dependent on the game and the situation. Alex asks, Aaron says, they don't let someone as important as Jerod in practice. No, they certainly do not. He said he was just kidding. That's good. No, I would love to go see a practice. Would absolutely love to go see a practice, but that has not happened. Oh, I forgot. Juwan Morgan update. I don't know anything for sure, and we're going to have to wait, for official word. But from a few different sources, I've heard that he's fine. So we're just going to have to wait and see. There was obviously a kind of a rumor going around the message board. I think I first saw it on the Peegs message board that, someone saw him out at the mall walking around the night after the game. I have no idea if that was true. But I have heard from a few different sources that it looks like it wasn't anything severe, that he should be fine, which is obviously huge because we need Juwan in every game, let alone what projects to be a really tough, rugged road game. So hopefully he's ready to go. That's what I'm assuming. But I'm going to wait until we either hear something on Archie's radio show tonight, which I'm assuming there's going to be a radio show tonight. Joel can confirm for us because he always goes. But then also, just wait and see who's warming up. But I would project Juwan to be out there. Alex says, Ryan has said that he won't evaluate this team fully until January. For understandable reasons. But Jerod, what are some milestones or parameters that you can give to this team or any team to assess their progress through the season? Hey, great question, Alex, especially since Ryan wasn't here. So Joel says no radio tonight. So, yeah, they're traveling. That's kind of what I figured. Milestones or parameters, I think a lot of times it's going to be dependent on the team and the context of the season. So, like, for example, 2013. Right? You think about that team. You enter the season number one. You've got a really experienced bunch. You're bringing back almost everybody from the season before when you were really good. You would expect to come out, play really well, and be competing for a number one seed all season long. So you're not waiting for that team to gel. You're expecting results right off the bat, and you're looking for incremental growth maybe in a few key areas. This season is obviously a lot different. There's a lot of new pieces from last year. The team last year didn't do as well, and there wasn't there was a lot expected this season, but no one was really quite sure what that would be. And so you have different milestones or parameters. I think, basically through the first 8 games of the season, Indiana has fared okay. They've held serve at home. They lost kind of the 2 questionable road games that you wondered about. You would have liked for them to get the Arkansas game. They weren't able to get it. And so, in terms of milestones, you've now you're in the midst of this 5-game stretch with Duke, Northwestern, Penn State, Louisville, and Butler. You needed to go at least 3-2 in that stretch at a minimum. You're sitting at 1-1. You've got a road game, a home game, and a neutral court game coming back. So I think so far you're in an okay spot. So I think that's kind of the next milestone for me is where do we finish after the Butler game? Right. And, in terms of parameters, I think those have kind of been set a little bit by this team. The injuries have mucked things up a little bit, but we've seen some really glaring issues like the turnovers, like the free throw shooting that are absolutely going to have to improve. And so I think now as you project over these next 3 games, and then especially the beginning of January, you really look, number one, can Indiana continue to maintain some of the improvements they've made, like the 3-point shooting is better. They've really been able to force turnovers. Some of those things that have really improved from last year, can you improve those, or can you maintain those improvements while also improving some of your big glaring issues so far this year? And with time to gel and to get more chemistry and to practice more with guys back from injuries, are you able to fix some of those issues? And do we then look back and say, okay, clearly that little stretch of bad play was just because, we barely had a full team to practice. So it's really dependent on the context of how the season goes, I think. But, so that would be the first milestone, or the next milestone anyway, is going to be after the Butler game. Then I think you've got to look after the really tough stretch in January, and you just got to kind of see where you are because there's probably going to be some carnage there. You're probably going to lose some games there. Can you keep your head at or above water so that then you can take advantage of the schedule opening up a little bit after the fact, simply because you have more home games and not as many teams projected to be top half of the Big Ten types, although, every, game in the Big Ten seems like it's going to be tough. So, that's what I would kind of say. I think you do want to hold off on your judgments and kind of saying, okay, this is the team that we have this season until January. But we've seen enough now through 8 games to understand what some of the improvements are, what some of the major weaknesses are. And we know a couple of really important stretches in the schedule. So you got to kind of take those in chunks and see how the team does, see what the record is, see where you're at. And hopefully you've made some of those improvements along the way as well. Without overreacting, because you never want to overreact still, this early in the season. And then the final question here, this is from Tony. Is IU still actively recruiting Trendon Watford, or has Coach Archie Miller given up on that possibility? Maybe nominally, but I think most people expect Trendon's going to be going to Memphis or staying in the South. Not to mention, it was probably unlikely that Trendon and Keon were going to go to the same school, and certainly it looks like, like the Keon Brooks recruitment is going very well for Indiana. So it doesn't look like Trendon Watford is still a reasonable possibility for the future. That's what I would say. It's recruiting, so I suppose anything can change, but that doesn't really seem like it's something that is at all likely to happen. Alrighty, well, there's the mailbag. So hopefully I answered some of those questions to your satisfaction. I agree that it's always better when Ryan's here and we can bounce stuff off of each other, but I appreciate your questions. I appreciate the opportunity to answer them. It is always enjoyable. And speaking of enjoyable, we are going to have our segment with Mike DeCourcy here coming up. So coming up next on the Assembly Call, time for our Big Ten Roundup with Mike DeCourcy from BTN and the Sporting News. He was at IU Northwestern, so we'll get his thoughts on the Hoosiers, plus take a look around the conference. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. All righty. Excellent. Nice to see so many of you all here in the chat mob. That is awesome. I love all the activity on Mondays. Okay. Let's bring Mike on. And I can rest my voice a little bit. All right. There he is.
Hi, Jerod.
Mr. DeCourcy, how are you?
I'm good. I apologize. I left my earpiece at home. I'm in Chicago. I have BTN tonight and tomorrow, and forgot to bring it along. So
no problem. No problem at all. I was going to say your background is a little bit different this week.
This is the Conrad Hotel.
Very nice. Well, no, we appreciate you being here, even while you're traveling. So not a problem. You're coming through loud and clear. So all is good. Okay, I'll do some intro music, and we'll hop right into this.
Awesome.
Here we go. Welcome back to Banner Monday. Each week here in our second segment, we zoom out to look at how things are going across the Big Ten Conference, and there's no one better to provide insight on Big Ten basketball than Mike DeCourcy, who covers Big Ten hoops for BTN in addition to his columns for the Sporting News. Mike, welcome back to Banner Monday.
Hi, Jerod.
It is always great to have you here with us. So let's take a look back at the previous week for Indiana, kind of as we always do here to start. Not really the most encouraging of weeks for Indiana. Get blasted by Duke, and then you barely squeak by Northwestern at home, a game that you were in attendance for. What were your impressions overall of Indiana this week?
Well, I would differ slightly with that. I did not expect much at Duke. I think that it went about as badly as it could go, except for the fact that no one got hurt. And that's big this year, Yeah,
exactly. We'll take that as a victory right now.
It was because, on Saturday, I think the biggest concern for me at the time the game concluded was not that it had been competitive, but more so that there was that moment where you thought Juwan Morgan might be in big trouble. And, that was very concerning. And with the way that Tim Garl was looking at his lower leg, you just never know. And the word that filtered out after the game was much more positive than that momentary fear. I think anytime somebody goes down now in a game with Twitter, it's obviously it automatically becomes, oh gosh, that's it, he's done. And no one's willing to wait around to see if the player's going to be okay. So I was really happy to hear that. And honestly, when I showed up on Saturday, I had at least 3 members of the IU media say, "Why this game? Why are you here today?" And I was there in part because it really worked out great for scheduling. And I like the idea of being at an early Big Ten game, one of the games in this early series, especially because I'm going to be on Big Ten Network the next 2 nights doing halftimes in the Big Show. So it was good to get my feet into that, but also because I expected it to be a good game. The preseason ranking from Northwestern, I went to watch them practice on the day before Big Ten Media Day. And I left that gym and I said, if that's the 13th best team in this league, man, this league is going to be smoking. They are very good. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they will make the NCAA tournament or whatever. That's up to them. But they showed on Saturday they're a very good basketball team. They're very hard to deal with. They do not. I saw Archie, and it was strategically logical with Indiana having 3 players basically who are point guards, and Northwestern having none, 0. That it made sense for that game to be played at a fast pace. And I saw Archie constantly exhorting the Hoosiers to try to push the ball. But the reality was, and in talking with Arch after the game, the reality was that Northwestern designed their whole scheme so that you can't, or that it's very difficult. Unless you're willing to completely sacrifice your own defensive responsibilities and leak a guy out and throw it deep. And IU's not going to destroy what they do for that. You're going to have a very difficult time getting Northwestern to go fast. And so your principal advantage in that matchup, and that's true for almost every team that they'll play, the principal advantage of you having a point guard or more and them having none is kind of muted. So then you have to execute what you do. And for Juwan Morgan to go down with 3:30 and change in that game with the Hoosiers behind, and for them to survive that absence, I should say, and then go out and win the game in those final minutes with, huge execution on the play that got Romeo Langford the floater. Great execution by the other 4 guys, and then tremendous finishing ability by Romeo. And then to be able to get a stop, and then to do the breakout against Northwestern's pressure, and then to make free throws. And those are all great signs for Indiana, I thought. They can play better basketball. But that was to win a tough game like that, I think, was really a step forward for the Hoosiers.
I will say, given the context and what happened with Morgan going out, the final 3:30 was really impressive. And that was absolutely a game they would have lost last year, and that without Romeo Langford they lose this year. Because with Juwan out, it's like, okay, where's the offense going to come from? And I thought Romeo really showed, a lot of kind of leadership by example, getting that bucket, playing really good defense. He, had the play where he, knocked the ball out. I mean, he really showed, how important he was. So I think you make a good point there. I think, some people, when you look at how difficult the Big Ten season is going to be, I suppose, and you look at, where are the home games that maybe won't just be knockdown, drag out, just crazy fights to the finish. You maybe hope that you can squeak by Northwestern, by 8, 9, 10 points, and it's not such a nail biter, but that just wasn't meant to be, and probably isn't going to be very many times in the Big Ten this season.
I think some of that may come from matchups. Teams that maybe are better or appear better on paper, or maybe come in with more imposing records. I mean, obviously, Northwestern had only played 7 games. So if you come in having won 14, you're going to look more imposing. Yeah. But there may be someone out there that suits IU a little better, that maybe, has, like I said, has more prestige or a more attractive record or whatever, more pros, whatever it might be, that comes into the gym and then maybe is a little tired from the trip or from other games they've played, and IU is able to get going a little bit in terms of transition and that sort of thing. And then maybe that game comes in that game instead of this one. Northwestern's way to win this year, especially on the road, is going to be to follow the exact blueprint that they did on Saturday, just not against any Romeo Langfords. Yeah. So I think that's why I don't think that you can be discouraged or should be discouraged from that defeat, or that victory, I should say. You shouldn't be discouraged from that victory because you did some things in that game that were really important to who you want to become. And you won without really playing great. I mean, there were some good things in that game, but you didn't shoot the ball great. You still don't have all your guys ready to go. You were still working back in Deron and Zach and Devontae. But in the end, especially Devontae and Zach and Devontae and Deron both played really important roles in winning that game. So I look at that. Look, I'm not a Pollyanna. I look at that game and I say that there was much more good that came out of that than bad, especially if Juwan is as okay as we think he is.
I like the glass half full thinking there. So you look ahead now for Indiana. It's a big opportunity this week, and it's also a treacherous couple of games. You got a tough road game at Penn State tomorrow, and then a home tilt with Louisville on Saturday that is, probably better than expected so far in Chris Mack's first season. How do you think Indiana stacks up in these two matchups, especially the one tomorrow night against Penn State?
Yeah, I mean, it's another difficult game because Penn State is very talented. They are, again, you walk onto the floor, presuming Juwan is healthy, you walk on the floor with two of the best players in the game and almost everybody you play. Now, that wasn't necessarily the case a week ago, but in almost every game you play. Now, Lamar Stevens would probably find, depending on how you rank those guys, Lamar Stevens would probably try, maybe wheedle his way in between the two of them. But you still have two of the three best players on the floor. So you have that advantage. But Penn State, again, is going to try to gum you up. They're going to try to make it they're going to try to make it a defensive battle. They're going to fight for every loose ball, which they did to beat Virginia Tech a week ago in their Big Ten Challenge game, ACC Big Ten Challenge game. And they're getting Mike Watkins back. Mike played in the game against Virginia Tech that they won. He was effective as a rebounder and to a lesser extent as a defender. He was not effective at all on offense in that game, but he certainly contributed to their winning. The area that you have the advantage is that Penn State's guards are mostly young and almost universally inexperienced. Jamari Wheeler's played a fair amount, but not as much as Devontae has, for instance, or as much as Zach has. So you have the advantage of that, and then the other players in their backcourt are pretty much all freshmen, and they are very talented, but they also have been prone at times to wild shot selection, in particular wild shot selection. Sometimes decision errors, those sorts of things. So you have to try to make those issues. And it's harder on the road because there's a comfort when you're playing at home that leads you to maybe think more clearly and make fewer bad decisions. So it's a real challenge for the Hoosiers, but it is a great opportunity. Now that you're 1-0, I don't know exactly how many teams are going to get out of the first week at 2-0, but you're one of the teams that has a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. And real quick, Louisville, what do you know about them coming in on Saturday?
Yeah, I got a chance to watch their Michigan State game on Tuesday as well against Michigan State. I didn't get to go because I was here in Chicago for BTN for that one, but I watched pretty much all of that game. And they are talented. They're not overwhelmingly talented, but they have some very good players. Jordan Wara, they're the 6'8" forward, very good shooter. They have a hybrid center forward named Stephen Enoch, who really shoots the basketball well for a 6'8", 6'9" guy. They have good depth. They can really shoot the basketball. You have to defend them. And I expect a bigger crowd for that one than you had for Northwestern. And so I think the crowd can really play a part in that one in the way that they only sporadically did in the Northwestern game, because I think they were as shell-shocked as maybe you were, Jerod, that the game was as close as it was.
Yep. All right, well, let's look around the Big Ten. We'll start as we always do with your power rankings. Michigan obviously number one. Who slots in after them? And then where is Indiana in the pecking order?
I was going to say maybe Michigan in 1, 2, 3, leave a big gap. It's really not. But in terms of performance,
sure today, feels like it.
I don't think that they are that much better than everybody else in the league. But to this point, they have played not only that much better than everybody in the league, but maybe that much better than everybody in the country. They've been just staggeringly good. No one's competed with them to this point. Yeah. And they've played good opposition. After that, I would go with Wisconsin. I think they have a great collection of victories and have started the Big Ten well. The next one was tough. I think Ohio State still has more good road wins than Nebraska does, but I'm going to go Nebraska first because I thought that Clemson win was a better quality win than either of the two road wins that Ohio State has at Cincinnati and at Creighton. That was a really rugged win that Nebraska has. I think they're playing really well right now. And you see James Palmer playing just fabulous basketball. They had to really fight for their win at Clemson, but that was a great one to get.
And where do you kind of see Indiana right now?
I think
kind of the same.
If Duran had tipped the ball in against Arkansas, they may have gotten their way into that group. But instead they have two losses. So, you're in a league right now where you still have multiple teams with better records. You're not going to crack that group unless you put some win out there that none of them can match. And that's not the case either. But I'll tell you what, Marquette has gone about making Indiana's resume look better and better to this point in the season. They've gone out since then and done really well. And so I think that from that standpoint, that win's going to get better and better over the weekend. Marcus Howard, who Indiana, remember I said about defending well in the backcourt. I mean, they did a great job on Marcus when they played, and Marcus won, I think I had 45 over the weekend in a big win. So that Indiana's record is getting better, and not always with what the Hoosiers do, but with what others do as well.
What are some of the players, some of the teams around the conference that caught your eye this week in particular?
Well, when Michigan went through that first 5 games, and they were torturing people that were really good, I was saying, they're not even their best yet. They're not even close to it. And not because they've only played 5 or 6 games or whatever. Everybody's got incremental improvements that they're making. But Jordan Poole, through those first 4 or 5 games, was barely making a basket. I mean, he was doing his job, but he wasn't scoring. He wasn't making shots. And I knew that eventually he would. And then last week against lightweights, North Carolina and Purdue, he went 10 of 13 from 3-point range. So that's what Michigan can be when they are at their best. Jordan Poole from the perimeter, complimenting Charles Matthews on the outside. And then, with the great defense that team plays now, I think that's a big part of the reason why the Wolverines are even scarier today than they were on the day that they went out and beat Villanova by 30. So great news for the Wolverines, not so much for the rest of the league. And I mentioned before, I thought that James Palmer had a tremendous week. I thought he was really good in Nebraska's games. A guy who I'll admit, I mean, I thought he had a great year last year, but I wondered, was that, because he hadn't done it before maybe, and because his game is so quiet and subtle, I wondered if he could put 2 years together back to back like that. Was he that player, or was he hot and had a great year? And he's showing he is that player. He looks more athletic and more aggressive. And sometimes it's not a question of a guy went to the gym and got more athletic or more dynamic or whatever. It's just now what you're doing and what you want to do. And so all the things you can do come to the fore. And I think that's what we're seeing from James.
So obviously Indiana playing Penn State in each team's second Big Ten game. What are the other ones that you're really going to be keeping your eye? I mean, obviously you'll pay attention to all of them, but yes. What are the highlights from the rest of these final Big Ten games before we turn it back to non-conference?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I was curious about was you saw Northwestern. They're one of the teams that got a really kind of. I mean, everybody's going to play a lot of pretty much everybody, not exactly everybody in the league. You'd have to play, I think, 26 games to do that, but pretty close to everybody's going to play everybody. But some of the teams got a tougher deal in scheduling than the others. And those were the ones that were sent on the road to play a high-level team, a top half of the league team, the ones that had to go to Wisconsin or Indiana or Michigan or whatever. And then there are the ones that also at home have to play the very top of those teams, and that's Northwestern. So as well as Northwestern played on the weekend, they could go 0-2 in the league pretty quick because they've got Michigan coming in. I believe it's tomorrow night, and that's a tough one to deal with. I think from that standpoint, they've got a real tough deal. Iowa is another team that started great, had that great tournament in New York, got themselves into the rankings, maybe a little high for what they're capable of, but still they earned it with their resume. And now they've got to go to Michigan State. They had a really tough, and that one's tonight. I believe that's on FS1. They had a really tough opener to their league, and now they've got to go to Michigan State. That's going to be a really tough one. And I'm a little curious tonight on BTN, our game. Rutgers, with that big win at Miami last week, kind of saved the league's bacon a little bit in terms of being able to fight it to a draw, because I don't think there was anybody that I knew that thought that Rutgers, I don't think that anyone thought that Rutgers could win a road game in that challenge. A home game, yeah, maybe, but a road game, that was really something. But then again, they got stuck with having to open with the Spartans and played well for 30 minutes and then kind of died out at the end. And now they've got to go to Wisconsin. So it's really a tough deal, but that's part of being in this league this year. It's really deep. I like I said, when I saw Northwestern practice, I knew the league was going to be really deep. And then they went out and performed in non-conference. And so now we know the league's not only deep, it's also good.
Rutgers still has the most ridiculous statistical profile of any team in the country. 19th on defense, 251st on offense. And they're actually top 100 in the country in three-point shooting, and they're still 251st on offense. It is, and they're actually shooting free throws worse than Indiana. So Hoosier fans, there's someone worse than us at free throw shooting. So at least we have that going for us. Final question for you, Mike. Do you like these kind of two Big Ten games right smack in the middle of non-conference season?
Well, it's tough on the teams, I realize. But as part of the operation to have a 20-game season, I really like the 20-game season in a expanded league like this. Yeah. And, of course, they're almost all expanded now, of course. But I really like that from a standpoint of it gives season ticket holders. One of the most forgotten people in college basketball are your season ticket holders, students, regular adults. I get really frustrated by the number of games we see in November and December on neutral floors. I'm not talking about the what we call the multi-team events, the Maui, Bahamas, et cetera, et cetera. They're fine because they get teams to play one another that might ordinarily not. Those are great. But the ones that bother me are the one-offs, played at the Garden or in Brooklyn or wherever else. Again, the Crossroads is different because it's such a unique event. But for the most part, these games that are played in Vegas or wherever, just so you don't have to go play a road game, really don't like that. So by playing 20 conference games, you get fans who buy tickets get an extra home game against a quality opponent that they wouldn't see. So I'm all for that. And in order to accommodate that, this is the design they came up with. And I don't think there's any better way to do it. Because it comes on the heels of the challenge, it really makes it kind of tough for the teams. And so it would be nice if that were mitigated in some way, but I don't think that the schedule permits it. But given that this is the way it has to be, I think it works out really well for people who love the sport, people who play the sport, people who coach it, and so I'm all in favor of it. I think that the Big Ten has really been wise in creating it this way.
I agree. It seems kind of crazy because you just kind of throw them in the middle of non-conference play, but if the Big Ten had a 20-game schedule 50 years ago, they would have put all 20 games together. But it's kind of hard with how the schedules are already set. But give me more conference games. I would take a true round robin if we could get it. It mitigates you mentioned earlier about certain schedules being more difficult for teams. I mean, that's an issue every year. 2 more games helps to mitigate that. It makes the regular season title more important, and I think that's winning the conference is still really, really important, and it makes that better. So it's imperfect the way that it's all set up, but I'm in favor of them. I think it's better. All righty. Any final thoughts, Mike? Always great to have you here with us.
Yeah, I'm like I said, going to be at BTN the next 2 nights. We've got great games and lots to talk about. And then, I'm looking forward to the Crossroads. I think it's next weekend.
Yeah.
A chance to see all 4 of those teams, and they've all performed really well to date. Not perfectly, but well enough that we go in with 2 great matchups and 2 opportunities for teams to get great wins, and then a chance for fans of the state of Indiana to celebrate one of the great basketball events of the year. So really excited about that as well.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, Mike, for being here as always. We appreciate you joining us on Banner Monday, and that means it is now time to turn our attention to Basketball 201. I just saw Ben Ladner is here. I think we're going to talk about Romeo Langford's play against Northwestern this week on Basketball 201. So stick with us here on the Assembly Call. All right, and cut. Sweet. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Jerod.
Really appreciate it.
I enjoyed it. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. We will talk to you next Monday.
See you next Monday. Thanks.
Yep. Bye. All right. So Ben is here. Let me see here. Ask Mike about the hook and hold thing. I didn't see that quickly enough, Joel. All right. Let's pull Ben in. See what he has prepared for us this week, since we missed it last week. And by the way, in just a quick note, on just some of the stuff that's in the chat, and I mean this, when we talk about, kind of speculating about guys transferring or what's going on off the court, this, that, or the other, it's interesting when you hear stuff about people off the court, because there have been players in IU's history that have, partied and had social lives and played really well, and obviously ones that haven't. So I think you always have to take that kind of stuff with a grain of salt. And I think, look, we all hear things, and, things get said, and we know that transferring and that kind of thing is part of just big-time college basketball, and part of what you kind of have to plan for as you project forward in recruiting. So let's just be, and I'm not saying anybody isn't being this, but just kind of an overall statement is let's be responsible with what we're putting in the chat and what we're kind of tossing around. I mean, I know this is public, but there's a small group of us that are here in the chat mob. So I don't want to stifle conversation, and I trust that when people say stuff, they've got a reason to say it. But let's just make sure that we're being responsible and being respectful to the players when we do that, because that's always been something that we've been about at the Assembly Call, and I want to make sure that is the case moving forward. And look who it is. I believe you've just been referred to as Mr. UNC in the chat, Ben. So I'm sure you'll take that.
Hey, listen, I'll take that.
Take that every day.
Yeah, you think it's an insult, but it's not an insult. That's all right with me.
Yes. Okay, so are we doing? What are we talking about today? Are we going to talk Romeo?
Yeah, I've got videos for Romeo and I've got videos for Juwan. So either way, he's all right with me.
Okay.
I think maybe we should do Romeo this week, because that's kind of more immediate, and then
let's do it
out on Juwan probably next week.
Okay.
And so we can that'll coincide nicely with that.
And one thing that we should be mindful of, the last few weeks, these have kind of been more film sessions than Basketball 201, because we've kind of been dealing with specific things. Sure. And I like that in season, but we should also, some weeks let's try and tie it to a bigger concept, like the kind of the offensive system that we're running, and that may be one thing that we want to do moving forward is what is Indiana doing offensively? Because in Duke, no one had a clue. You couldn't tell what they were trying to do. But I don't think that's a question that a lot of Indiana fans can answer. They really understand the defense Indiana's trying to play.
Yeah.
But offensively, it's not quite as clear. So I think that'd be interesting. What are some of the primary sets, the primary actions they're trying to do, one that have been successful that haven't been?
Yeah, that actually might go nicely with talking about Jawan, and definitely something we can dive, especially like now that Big Ten play is about to start kind of get rolling. We'll kind of have a better idea of that as well, I think.
Okay. All right, let's hop into this.
And plus, one more thing, like if people like have specific things that they want addressed, that might be a good thing to like put in the chat or like email or whatever. Like, because I don't have that many like specific things like planned out. Okay. So if people are like, "Hey, I'm curious about this," then that would be.
Yeah, don't put them in the chat because we might miss it. I don't always catch everything that's in the chat. So email me or tweet us. Yeah, email me or tweet us, so we can plan it for the future, or put it in the community. Yeah, that'll work. Okay, let's get some music and get rolling here. Here we go. Welcome back to Banner Monday. Here at the Assembly Call, we don't just want to make you a smarter IU basketball fan. We want to make you a smarter basketball fan, period. And that is the purpose of Basketball 201. And here to lead us through talking about some of this stuff is Ben Ladner, our intern this year, senior at Indiana. Been doing a great job with these segments. And as he and I were just talking about here in the break, we kind of started out doing more big picture conceptual stuff in the last couple of weeks. We've been kind of looking more at just like straight film of Indiana possessions. And we'll kind of balance those two things moving forward. So if you have specific things that you would like to see us talk about or hear us talk about here in this segment, shoot us a tweet, post a note in the IU community if you're a member, or send me an email. We'll make sure to kind of put that down, mark it moving forward. But Ben, welcome back to Banner Monday, man. We missed you last week. It's always great to have you here.
Yeah, it's been a little while. I was traveling last Monday, making the trip from Atlanta back to Bloomington, about 8 hours. So I was pretty much off the grid that entire day.
So we are going to talk about Romeo today, right?
Yes.
So before we kind of jump into this, I do want to plug your recent episode of Podcast on the Brink. You're doing inside of our Podcast on the Brink feed. You and Seth are doing kind of a little mini show called The Matchup, and you did an episode with Sam Vicini, good friend of the show, Sam Vicini. As you said, he writes for The Athletic, one of the best guys at kind of evaluating, college players as they project to the NBA. And you guys went through pretty much every player on the roster. I was really surprised at some of the names that came up.
I was too, actually. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Sam has thoughts on Al Durham, and I was like, wow.
The one that surprised me was he was like, Demezy Anderson.
Demezy.
And I was like, whoa. I'm happy to talk about anyone on the team, and I could talk about Johnny Jager's NBA prospects. They're not great. I was kind of surprised to hear Demezy and Clifton Moore was another one.
Yeah, it was like he had been really like pondering Demezy's NBA potential for like 30 minutes, and he had some real thoughts there.
Yeah, I think he brought up Clifton as well, and I don't think he was necessarily saying that Clifton's a future NBA player, but he was kind of saying, I've heard from other people that he's interesting, and I was like,
Entering last season, Clifton was on NBA mock drafts as a first rounder for like 2019 or 2020 because he had that one really strong performance, I think, at the Jordan Brand game.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's ambitious.
We've seen how that's worked out, but that is the kind of potential that he has if he can kind of put it all together. So I guess at least it's the potential that one person saw in him. So,
sure.
He's still a young guy. But that is not our topic of conversation for today. I just wanted to mention that because I highly recommend that folks go listen to that in the Podcast on the Brink feed. And some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today, I think, is going to illustrate some of what you and Sam talked about with Romeo, because you spent the majority of the time talking about Romeo. Sam has really done some extensive writing and analyzing of Romeo and kind of how his game projects to the next level. So let's look at that, look at some of these clips against Northwestern and kind of see how he's doing now at this level. But folks should listen to that podcast to kind of get the bigger context for how he projects forward as well. So with that said, I will turn it over to you. And remember, if you're listening on the podcast, go to the YouTube channel. You can watch the video of this segment, and we're going to start posting the individual videos on their own. Right now, go to episode 450, the Banner Monday for December 3rd, but we will have all of these segments posted on their own, so you can just find the playlist and get those segments so you can get the video to go along with Ben's explanations.
Yeah, and I'll also say that, Sam and I talked about Romeo's offense and defense, and this is going to focus mostly on his defense, if not entirely on his defense in that Northwestern game. So if you want to get kind of more fleshed out thoughts on his offense and how that might translate to the NBA level, that podcast is the place to find it, I think. So yeah, I mean, I think, to me, that Northwestern game was the best all-around defensive game of Romeo Langford's IU career so far. He was dialed in, I thought, for most of the game. There were a couple kind of slippages, and we'll talk about those. And I've got a couple videos of those. But for the most part, he looked really impressive, and he spent a lot of the game guarding Vic Law, Northwestern's primary scoring option. And in fact, in the second half, even when Zach McRoberts came back into the game, it was still Romeo who got that primary assignment. And so clearly Archie Miller liked the work he was doing on Vic Law, and hopefully these clips will kind of help illustrate why. So this is Northwestern's first or second possession of the game, comes with about 19 minutes to play in the first half. You can see them kind of bringing it across half court. We've got Rob Finnessy on the ball, and basically Northwest, they ran a lot of sets. They're not really an ISO pick and roll and spread everyone out kind of team. They want to run through their sets, and given the talent that they have, that's probably the best way to attack for them, because they don't really have that many individual creators. But Vic Law is probably the closest thing that they do have. And so here they're kind of running a set. They're going to get the ball up here, and they want to bring Vic Law through over to this right block. You can see Derek Pardon coming to set up this cross screen over here. He's going to run underneath, and this guy's going to clear out to the weak side. So they bring him through. Actually, I guess the play will wait. Now they swing it over, and then you've got the cross screen. So Vic Law swung it around. That wasn't a look designed to get him a shot on that left wing. So he swings it to the top and then back over to the right wing. And then here comes Law along the baseline off that cross screen. And this is a really subtle play by Romeo. It's not really, he doesn't get a steal. He doesn't get a block. It's not really something that jumps out, but it's a really important play as far as just kind of gumming up what Northwestern wanted to do. So you can see him come across. He goes over the screen, but that's fine because he's got Juwan Morgan helping him, so he's not in danger of getting back cut or anything like that. And then as Vic Law comes over the block, you can see Romeo just kind of bump him off his spot, right? And that derails the play. They've got another second option coming here, but Al Durham does a nice job getting over that pick. Justin Smith with some nice help there, and they force a contested long two. And that's what IU wants. I mean, any defense is going to live with that. And so you just kind of look at the work Romeo does here. You can tell that they want Law here, and it's really subtly just kind of right there, just takes that pass away. They're not able to go in there.
And he beat him to the spot too.
What's that?
He beat him to the spot too.
He did, yeah. And that's good recognition by Langford as well, because that's, I think, been one of his issues defensively, is just recognizing and diagnosing plays as they happen, kind of understanding where opponents want to go. He doesn't anticipate so much as he reacts at this point in his career. And this was a really nice play. And IU probably knew Northwestern wanted to do this out of the gate. That was probably in the scouting report, in the film that they watched. This is something that they do quite a bit to try to get Law posted up. But still, good anticipation, good recognition by Langford. And then, obviously good fight, good tenacity on the defensive end to kind of take that play away.
Yeah, and you contrast that with some of what we saw in, say, the Arkansas game, when he really on that end and granted, he was carrying a very heavy load offensively, especially in the first half when Juwan was out, but he really just kind of looked disengaged at times defensively in that game, and you would see his man just kind of move with impunity, and Romeo would be late getting there. Here, you can see him kind of diagnosing it, as you said, you see him recognizing what's happening. And, it's interesting because I think you watch him and he's not necessarily like down in a stance the whole time, with the greatest maybe fundamentals, but he's recognizing it, and he moves. He's able to move fast without looking like it. So he's still able to beat the guy to the spot. And like you said, when he needed to get physical and get tough, he bumps him right off. It's a really, really strong play.
Yeah. And I think he actually is one of those guys that benefits from guarding the other team's best scorer, just because you can kind of lock in on that guy. And if the guy's going to have the ball in his hands a lot of the time, it kind of forces you to pay attention. Yeah. Whereas for some people, guarding off the ball can be a real struggle. Like I think you see this a lot with guys like, Zach LaVine, Jabari Parker in the NBA, where they just space out off the ball. They just don't pay attention. And Romeo's not nearly that bad, but it is easier for a lot of guys just to, this is your assignment. And if he has the ball in his hands and you're just kind of able to focus in on that, it helps you kind of lock in a little bit better defensively. Whereas, it's so easy just to lose track of your guy off the ball. And we'll see a clip here pretty soon of Romeo doing that. And he did that a couple times in the Arkansas game. He's prone to getting backdoor cut when he's playing off the ball, just because he doesn't always have that same level of engagement defensively. And again, the instincts, are good. They're solid for a freshman, but still plenty of room to improve relative to the rest of college basketball.
I continue to love your insistence on making every player comp an NBA player comp.
It's the quickest thing that my brain reverts to. I would have to spend, there'd be 5 seconds of silence if I had to think of
Hey, it works. Okay, let's move on to the next one.
So the second one here, another play from the first half, about 16 minutes to play. Northwestern with the ball, and Romeo again guarding Vic Law. Zachary Roberts is yet to come into the game, and again, they're looking to get Law kind of coming off a handoff, off kind of a pin down on the right side. So he starts on the left side, swings it to the left wing, and he's going to cut through. And there's going to be a double screen here for number 10. I think that's Miller Kopp coming off this screen, looking for a three if he's got it. And then there's kind of some confusion on Indiana's part, but Justin Smith is able to get kind of through that screen, gives a good closeout, and Kopp, doesn't really want to shoot. He's more looking to drive. So then Vic Law is going to come out here to the right wing and look to get the dribble handoff. And Romeo, this is where you kind of see his natural talent and just his physical gifts come into play, because he denies Law the ball, but not only does he do that, he uses his length to poke in there and get a steal and then dunk on the other travel and then dunk on the other end. So right here, you can kind of see him. You can see him recognize he wants to do the dribble. You can see right there when he puts 2 hands on the ball, he's going dribble handoff, and Romeo's right arm starts to move and just come through that passing lane and knock the ball away. And if you're not strong with the ball against a long guy like Romeo Langford, it's going to get picked and it's going to be going the other way.
His recognition is really good. Like you said, his instincts. And it's interesting to me on defense, like his ability to make little quick, short bursts, either with his hands or with his feet, is really impressive. It's like I don't know if he does this on purpose, but it's like he conserves energy until the moment when he's got to make the play. We saw it in the last clip where it's like, okay, he's doing just enough to stay in front of Vic Law. Now, boom, he beats him to the block and knocks him off. Same thing here. He's moving with him. He's denying the pass. Now, boom, he sees the opening with the ball. He's taking it and going the other way, and it's like a blur. It's like a quick blur. So that's why you can't necessarily just look at how he's moving when he's guarding off the ball all the time and say, okay, well, wait a minute. He's, again, like I said before, he's not in a stance. He's not moving as quick as you want. When the opportunity is there to make the play, more often than not, he's able to do it. Yeah, he almost like lulls you into getting comfortable and then kind of turns it on. And when he sees you kind of relax, that's when he applies the pressure. Yeah. And so, if you don't fight to get to your spot, if you don't really deliver the pass with force, he's the kind of guy that can just kind of spring awake and then, dart through a passing lane, or like you said, bump the guy off his spot, something like that, and really make a defensive play. So the next clip here, and it's fun watching him because you can, he has those instincts, and you can see, where he's able to maybe see the game a step or two ahead of people. And that, one of the reasons why I'm glad that we're doing this is it's easy to appreciate his offense, but like I hope Indiana fans are spending time appreciating when he's really locked in defensively, how good he is, how good he can be. Because in the Northwestern game especially, it was clear how well he was playing.
Yeah, and I think there is a flip side of that as well, which is the next clip kind of illustrates that, and it's what Sam and I talked about on that podcast, where he in high school he was never really held accountable on defense just because he was the best guy, he was often the biggest guy, and he wasn't really asked to get into a stance and really get into a guy's shorts defensively. So he was he has a tendency to kind of mosey around. And you mentioned he can that can be an advantage for him because he's able to kind of change speeds and change intensity levels on a dime. But also, there are times when he just kind of, jogs with his man or doesn't, doesn't stay attached and then gets back cut or just kind of loses concentration for 1 second and then loses his man. So that's actually a good segue into this next clip, because this is actually him guarding off the ball, which kind of goes back to what I was saying about how for some guys, it's just easier to guard on ball and just have that, primary assignment. You don't have to worry about anything else. It's a little bit like switching, where instead of worrying about what's the coverage, where do I need to be? Like, how do I need to, guard this guy away from the ball? It's just, okay, this is my man. He's in front of me and I have to guard him. So here he's guarding Ryan Taylor, Zach McRoberts has come into the game guarding Vic Law, which I think is, going into the game, I thought that would probably be the matchup that you'd want, the kind of, more dogged, kind of defensive minded wing McRoberts on Vic Law, because, Law is a really special offensive talent. And so Romeo here, he actually does a pretty good job early on in the possession. You're going to see Taylor going to come get this dribble handoff. And Romeo, he doesn't stay totally attached over the top of the handoff, but he goes under and he's able to recover in time to prevent any kind of shot from getting off, and then gets back in front of the ball, swing pass over. But then watch Romeo's head and his eyes. He kind of just loses focus, turns his head, and Taylor just completely beats him. Yep. Wide open 3 catch and shoot. And, that was the play that really stuck out to me in the first half defensively, because as well as Romeo played on defense in that first half, and really in the second half was fantastic. That play, just the momentary lapse against a really good shooter, that creates a lot of space. You saw how open Ryan Taylor was. If you give someone that much space, they're probably going to knock down that shot, and that stems from just losing concentration and not really staying focused on the defensive end. Can
you run that one back to the start again?
Yeah.
So, like when you look at where Romeo is at the start of the possession, should he, because we talk about the pack line and some of the principles of the pack line, when the ball reverses over to the left side, should he have gone over in closer to the lane, or because it's Taylor, a known shooter, was the assignment probably stick closer to him rather than pack it in as much?
Yeah, I think it's partly because he's a shooter, and I think it's partly because it seems clear that Northwestern wants to get Taylor involved in some sort of action here, and so you can kind of anticipate that dribble handoff coming. I think they were probably looking for it right here, and you can see Taylor pointing the other way, saying, "No, go the other direction." But I think Romeo kind of saw that they wanted to get a DHO going with Taylor, and so as soon as that handoff is made, you kind of see him coming around, and you can tell that this is going to, end up going here, and they want to get that handoff going that way. So I think normally if the ball were just staying over here on the left wing, you'd probably sag off into the paint, maybe to the block, since Taylor can shoot it. But because the play is clearly going to him, he stays attached, and you're kind of able to get ahead of it.
Makes sense. Okay. So a couple good ones. That one obviously not so good, and like you said, that illustrates the issues with Romeo's defense right now. And a lot of freshmen are going to get caught a lot of freshmen, especially freshmen playing that many minutes, are going to get caught with that happening. Even really good defensive players as freshmen. So he certainly needs to clean that stuff up, because we've seen that hurt Indiana in some games. It didn't in this one, but that needs to not become a habit, obviously.
Yeah. So this next play that I'll show is more or less the opposite of that last play. He's back on Vic Law, which again, I think, kind of helps him lock in there. So Law's going to start the possession. He was actually acting as their primary ball handler for a lot of possessions, because Northwestern doesn't really play a point guard. So they're just using Law, who's a wing, to bring the ball up and kind of get them into sets, which is not ideal, but I think Vic Law is good enough to do that. And then, for his individual purposes, I think that's good for his development and things like that. But so that meant that Romeo was guarding on the ball and kind of having to move his feet quite a bit in this game. And so you can see start of the possession immediately. He's in a stance. He's ready to go. He's locked in. And so Vic Law is going to try to, create a little bit of separation, get the ball into the post. And then watch Romeo. He stays attached to Law the entire time. He knows that Vic Law wants to come back to the ball. He knows that that's probably where the possession is going to end up going. And he just maintains contact basically the entire time. Wow. Law tries to juke him out. And then he kind of gives up on the play. Pardon ends up dribbling to the left, trying to get a backdoor play going here. Devontae Green with the quick hands able to knock it away. So one thing I actually noticed with Vic Law, you can kind of tell on this play, once he gives the ball up, if he doesn't really get it back immediately, he wasn't great at going back to the ball and kind of, getting it again and forcing that issue like a lot of stars do. A lot of guys, they give up the ball and if you deny them, they're still going to try to go back to it. But for some guys, if you kind of just, frustrate them and get into them and kind of prevent them from being able to shake you, they kind of just give up and they don't really make the effort to go back to the ball. And I think Vic Law had a little bit of that in him on Saturday. And Romeo was able to take advantage of that by playing hard defense at the point of attack. And then after he gave up the ball, and then you were kind of just able to take Vic Law out of the possession at that point.
And that was an example of great fundamental defense. He was low, moved his feet well. I mean, almost every single movement he made with his feet, everything he did with his arms to deny the ball, and how he switched his arms when it went from one angle to the next. That was physical and fundamental defense from Romeo there.
Yeah. And I think, this next play is a similar one. It's kind of just straight up, old school man-to-man defense. So we don't have to spend too much time on it, but I think it
we love straight up old school man-to-man defense on this.
Yeah. But there's not a whole lot to analyze here. It's kind of just, Romeo showcasing what kind of defender he can be when he's locked in, just as far as moving his feet and contesting shots. Kind of middle of the shot clock here, but Northwestern kind of just clears out and lets Vic Law go to work. And again, same as the last possession, basically at half court in a stance, locked in, keep really keying in on Vic Law with arms aren't completely extended, but he's got his knees bent, he's sitting, he's got his hands ready to go to deflect a pass if he needs to. So Law just wants to drive left, and Romeo, it looks like he gets beat here, right? It looks like Law's kind of got that step, and Romeo turns kind of parallel to the sideline, but because he's so long and so athletic, he crosses his feet once and is able to slide back in front. And then a good help from Rob Finnessy here, a stunt, it's called a stunt and recover, where basically you dig down, shut off that lane, and then get right back out to the shooter there. And Romeo just contests the shot and forces a really, really tough look.
The help there from Rob is really important because you're right. It did look like Romeo got beaten. It would have been interesting to see what Vic Law would have done if the help didn't come so quickly, because he might have been able to get all the way to the basket. But It's almost like the threat, Rob stepping out there slowed his momentum just enough to help Romeo recover, and then it forced that really tough shot.
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges of defending so far out on the court. Like if you're, D'ing up a guy man-to-man at half court and really applying pressure, if he gets by you, he just has so much space to go, and he's able to really build up a head of steam, and you don't have quite as much. He has more distance to travel where there isn't help defense in his way. And so it's a little bit easier to get beat when you're out there. But Romeo, I think, did a really nice job of turning, sprinting back in front of the ball and being able to contest the shot in a way that, a lot of guys just can't, because they don't have the ability, or they don't have the motor or the size or something like that. So I think Romeo was able to combine a lot of those things really nicely in that play.
It's going to be interesting to see how Romeo's defense is Tuesday night, because two of the things that have really played into Romeo's best defensive performances have been being at home and kind of getting a matchup against a guy that the other team really wants to run their offense through, as you explained. Yeah. Against Penn State, Indiana is going to be on the road, and Penn State, they're running about 31% of possessions through Lamar Stevens, who Romeo's not going to guard. Romeo will probably be matched up on Josh Reeves, who is known more as a defensive player than an offensive player. So will we see kind of a reversion to Arkansas level defense for Romeo, or, is he starting to learn some things and get a little bit more consistent moving forward? It'll definitely be, especially given the context of this, what we're talking about now, that'll be interesting to watch Tuesday night against Penn State.
Yeah. And I think just playing in the Big Ten is going to provide him a lot of really good opportunity, not only to defend really good players on the wing, but to be defended by really good players on the wing. And
especially Josh Reeves, who's one of the best.
Right. And Vic Law too. I mean, Vic Law was, big all defense first team 2 years ago in the Big Ten on that, Northwestern NCAA tournament team. And I still think one of the best perimeter defenders in the league, and one of my favorite guys in the Big Ten, Vic Law. But that's one of the things that Sam and I actually talked about on that kind of prospect breakdown was, can Romeo create separation against elite defensive talent? And we don't really know yet. Against Duke, he really struggled. He wasn't able to get in the lane the way that he's used to. He wasn't able to create separation for jump shots very reliably, at least not to the point where he was able to, hit shots. He went 3 of 15 in that game. So I think, when he's got a guy like Josh Reeves on him, Vic Law, I think, did a really good job on Romeo yesterday, especially in that first half. And it wasn't really until Law went out of the game that Romeo started kind of picking up steam on the offensive end. And then he was able to kind of carry that over and get it going in the second half, regardless of who was guarding him. But I thought Vic Law did a really good job on Romeo yesterday, or Saturday, I should say. And I think Josh Reeves will as well. I think there are guys up and down the Big Ten who can really play some perimeter defense. And so that's not only going to be a fun matchup to watch, night in and night out, but just providing him some challenges, and Zach McRoberts as well, just those elite guys on the perimeter. How do they match up with those sorts of players?
Do you have any more videos?
I got one more video, and this is kind of the good and the bad of Romeo's defense, where we kind of see both elements of it. He spaces out a little early in the possession, but then he's able to dial in and kind of make a huge play to keep Indiana in the game here. So this is where there's 10 on the shot clock as the clip starts, but Northwestern basically, kind of hot potatoed the ball around for 15 seconds before this. They were looking to kind of get some action going into the lane on the right side, but weren't really able to do it. They fumbled the ball a little bit, and it ends up here on the right wing with Derek Pardon coming over to set a screen. Vic Law is in the weak side corner with Romeo in help position, but kind of shading toward Vic a little bit just so he can't get a catch and shoot jumper. And so what you see is basically dribble handoff, and Northwestern just wants to kind of try to create something, get a shot up, because there's only 7 on the shot clock at this point. And so watch, as soon as that pump fake goes up, I'll rewind it like half a second. Watch Vic Law, right when the ball handler plants his feet, watch Law just goes right to the basket, and Romeo's not even looking at him. So he loses track of him. Law beats him to the boards, grabs a huge offensive rebound. But Romeo, we mentioned that skill, that instinct, that size, that length, he's able to kind of recover, use that length, and block the shot. So it's, you see kind of what people have concerns about defensively, because he just loses track of a really, really important offensive player on the other team. But then he's able to just use his physical tools and, make a huge play that arguably saved the game for Indiana. And so you get kind of the tantalizing part of his defensive ability, and then you get the worrying part as well. And you kind of are left to parse through, can we coach the former, can we coach the first part of that play out of him so that we get more of the second part? And I think that's probably a good way to describe where Romeo's defense is at right now, is you've just seen so many flashes of defensive potential, ability to get in passing lanes, ability to kind of stifle guys on and off the ball, use his length to strip guys, things like that. But then you also see the back cuts, you see the getting beat to the boards, you see losing guys off of screens, things like that, where you hope that it would be a little bit more consistent, just because you know how good he can be when he is dialed in.
That's interesting. That was such a big play. And, the block was huge, and everybody remembers the block. Few people, probably myself included, remembered what happened to get there, which you're right, was the bad. What's interesting about that play is there aren't many guys who could recover and make that block. Yeah. I mean, the athleticism and the length that it took to make that block, that was really important. So I think if you were going to have a freshman only be able to do one part of the play, you would want it to be the second part, right? Because that shows kind of the gifts. But do we at all underrate, because you would look at that and you say, okay, well, you should be able to teach Romeo to pay better attention, to be a little bit more locked in. Is that something that does come and that you see guys really get better at? Or is that just kind of one of those things that's like you either have that kind of attentiveness and that kind of awareness on defense as kind of a natural thing, or you don't?
That's so tough, because it kind of just depends on the player. I mentioned Zach LaVine earlier. He's a great example because he's so athletic. And coming out of college, one of his big things was he can shoot, he can dunk, and he's athletic enough that even though he's not good at defense right now, you figure he could probably get there. And it just hasn't happened for him. But then, there are examples of people across the league. Klay Thompson is one of them, where you go into the league and people are saying, well, he's, defense could be a question mark, could be a liability for him. And they turn into a great defensive player. And so much of that, you see it a lot with centers too, where so much of playing defense as a center in the NBA is just recognition. It's just being able to realize what's going on and be able to plug the hole, because you're the back line, you're the backbone and kind of the anchor of the defense. And so with guards, you do need to stay more locked in, but I think you can overcome things with physical tools if you kind of put the work in, and if you have maybe the mental wherewithal to be able to do that. And I think, I haven't seen anything that suggests Romeo isn't able to do that. I think he's a smart kid. I think he's a good kid, a hard worker. I haven't heard anything to the contrary. So, we'll see. I don't think he'll ever be an elite defender at the college or NBA level. But, I think playing under Archie, at the very least, I talked about this with Sam as well. You can have your disagreements with what kind of defense Indiana runs, the system, how they do certain things. And I do have my disagreements with it. But at the very least, Archie Miller's going to make you play hard on defense. He's going to make you compete. He's going to make you lock in. And if you don't, then, you're going to sit on the bench. And if you're Romeo Langford, you probably get a little bit more leeway because he's so good on offense that you you need him out there on the floor. But Archie's the kind of guy who makes people dial in defensively, and you play hard under him because that's just part of being on the floor. That kind of just comes with it. And so I think that'll be good for Romeo, just if nothing else, teaching him how to buy in, how to recognize things on defense. And, ultimately we'll see where he is at the end of the year. I think people are a little concerned with his defense right now from an NBA prospect perspective, but I don't think there's any evidence that he won't get there, if he's able to kind of just be more consistent.
He certainly has the ability. It's the consistency that will determine how good of a defender he can be, because as you showed in these clips, he has the ability to make elite defensive plays. Yeah. It's just how consistently does he want to, or can he be that elite defender?
So I would also add that, I think with a young player, you tend to put more stock, or at least I do, you put more stock in the good plays, the good flashes than the bad ones, because the thinking goes that they're so young, they're so malleable at this point in their careers that you can kind of coach those bad flashes out of them and kind of get the good flashes more regularly, more consistently. That's one of the reasons I was so high on Justin Smith coming into this year, is because I saw just enough of him, just kind of these glimpses. And obviously that hasn't panned out the way that maybe I expected it to this year. But you see these glimpses, you see kind of just these little bits and pieces where you're like, okay, if he can put that together on a consistent basis going forward, he'll be a year older, he'll be a year more experienced, that sort of thing. He could be a really, really special player. And so I think you see that with Romeo, where you see enough good flashes on the defensive end that leads me to believe that, he could probably put this together and become pretty good.
So let's do this for next week, because Indiana, between now and the next time we get together for Banner Monday, we're going to face Penn State, who's top 10 defensively right now, and Louisville, who not as good defensively, now as they've been in the past, but Chris Mack has always been known as a pretty good defensive coach. Mm-hmm. So we got a lot of comments from the chat mobbers, when I said, talking about what kind of sets does Indiana run, that kind of thing. Let's focus on the offense. Okay. And it doesn't necessarily need to be Romeo-centric, but, maybe at least 2 or 3 videos of, the kinds of things Indiana's trying to do. Because, like we've seen Indiana try to get Romeo the ball, like right around the elbow, kind of let him go to work. But what are some of the other things that they're doing on a regular basis? And what does this offense look like? And I will say, one thing to keep in mind with Archie, that we're starting to learn, he's certainly, as you mentioned, he's going to focus on the defense. And he's also not a coach that tries to put everything in at the start of the year. He seems like the kind of coach that wants to put in this, let's master it, and let's move on. And so I think we're going to see both the offense and the defense evolve through the season. So, but we can at least look at it through, 9, 10 games. I guess it'll be 10 games. What are some of the things that we're seeing kind of the most common?
Well, I can say this now. It's a lot of it is just Juwan Morgan in the post, which is a nice tease for the piece that I have coming out whenever I end up finishing it. He is, so much of their offense is derived just by dumping the ball down to him and just seeing what happens, because he's so unselfish and he's so smart and he's so skilled that you can feel comfortable just giving him the ball. And if the defense double teams, he's going to kick it out and find someone who's open. If they don't double team, he's probably going to score. He's one of the most efficient post players, post scorers in the Big Ten, if not the country. And now he's finally got some of the weapons around him that can make those kick out passes really, really dangerous. And so that's a lot of it, is just kind of, giving the ball to him and letting him do something. It's almost like when you have, a star point guard or something, just giving him the ball, letting him get into the lane off of a pick and roll and making decisions. It's that version for bigs. It's the big man version of that, where you just give him the post and let him create out of there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we look forward to. Is that going to be on Inside or Inside?
That'll probably be on Inside the Hall. I need to ask Juwan Morgan about that before I can publish it. So I'll have to wait till the press conference or availability or something. But yeah. But I'll definitely keep an eye as well on half court sets and kind of motion principles that are in there as well, because that's something that I've been curious about as well, is like, what are they running consistently? What's like their bread and butter kind of play? I don't really know that they have one other than the Juwan Morgan post up right now.
Yeah. Juwan, what do you think of the dump the ball into Juwan offense? Are you a fan of this?
Yeah. Is that a good strategy?
Yeah. Works for me.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome, Ben. Always appreciate your appearances, and we will look forward to doing it again next week.
Yep. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so coming up here, our final segment of Banner Monday. Indiana has a tough game coming up tomorrow night at Penn State. We're going to go into the numbers, do a preview of that next here on the Assembly Call. Stick with us. right. Good stuff, Ben.
Thanks.
As always. And I will get probably sometime later this week, I'll get those first 2 videos up that you sent. And then, yeah, just as we move forward, just, pop those out and we'll just create a playlist that has just those videos on there.
Yeah, my it's tough because when I export the videos, my computer crashes like 1 out of every 2 times I try to do it.
Oh, really?
So, every time I have to export it out of Premiere, my computer just like, it's too slow and it takes too much effort and the computer just peters out. So we'll see. It's inconsistent right now, but I'll try to get those up as soon as I can.
Okay. Sounds good, man.
Cool.
You're not going to Penn State, are you?
No.
Okay.
But I will be at Louisville. I'll be broadcasting Louisville.
Oh, nice.
Shout out WIUX 99.1 if you want to listen. Not that they, wouldn't listen to Fish, but it's there.
I don't know. You've got quite the fan base now after these Banner Monday segments. I think you might get some people listening to you.
Right, so I'll color commentary for that one.
Cool, man. Well, we'll talk soon.
All right, talk to you then.
All right, see you, man. Okay. All right, let's get into this Penn State preview here. Knock this out. Okay. Welcome back to Banner Monday. Each week here in our final segment, we look ahead to Indiana's upcoming opponent for that week. This week, that is a Tuesday night tilt in Happy Valley against Penn State, the second of Indiana's 2 December Big Ten games. I saw Chronic Hoosier tweet out right before we went live that Indiana opens as a 2-point dog at Penn State, over-under of 136. Pomeroy gives Indiana a 44% chance of victory, prediction of 69-67. I got to say, ever since Penn State has joined the Big Ten, it's kind of been one of those that, you look at it either at Penn State or at home, and it feels like a game that you should automatically feel really good about that you're going to win because Indiana is typically, better than Penn State and just the reputations. Certainly playing at Penn State recently has not been a walk in the park. It feels like some of Indiana's worst performances have come at Penn State, and shoot, we all remember a few recent home games that didn't go too well against Penn State as well. Here's what I would say about this game. And that is that, I'm a little nervous about this game. I'm a little worried about this game. Not that I think Penn State is great, although I do think Penn State is good. I mean, they're 39th in KenPom. I think people were wondering what this team was going to be like when they lost Tony Carr, who was such an important part of their team last year. I mean, he used so many possessions. Last year, Tony Carr used almost 30% of possessions and was really, just a really good player and obviously helped spur their NIT title run. But they've been better than I expected them to be this year, and it's really driven by defense. Lamar Stevens, who came in with Tony Carr, that big recruiting class that they had, one-time IU target Lamar Stevens, has really kind of taken on that role as being the high-usage offensive player. He's actually using more possessions this year than Tony Carr did last year, and is even ranked 10th in KenPom's Player of the Year statistics, which kind of seems crazy. But here's the reason that I'm nervous about this. The reason I'm nervous about this game and why I think this is a dangerous matchup for IU, there's really 3 main reasons. And they all kind of go back to where we've seen Indiana struggle so far this year. All right, because Indiana has really struggled in its 2 road games against Arkansas and Duke, both pretty solid defensive teams. Indiana scored 0.95 points per possession against Arkansas. The Hoosiers scored 0.87 points per possession against Duke. I don't think Penn State is in any way is comparable to playing at Cameron Indoor. Not the talent level, not the atmosphere, any of that. And the atmosphere isn't even going to be close to what was there against Arkansas. But, Penn State is, as I said, 8th in the country in defensive efficiency. So they are a good defensive team. This will be the 3rd good defensive team Indiana has played on the road. And so far, we haven't seen Indiana perform well in that situation. And, Virginia Tech, currently ranked 6th in adjusted offensive efficiency. They went into Penn State last week, and they scored 0.98 points per possession. So it's not like Penn State has just been dominating low-rated competition. They have played good defense against pretty much everybody. They held a really good team in Virginia Tech. And Virginia Tech, has 2 offensive players who are high-usage, high-efficiency guys. They both really struggled in that game, and you look at what Indiana likes to do offensively where, so much runs through Juwan Morgan and pretty much everything else runs through Romeo Langford. And so the template is there, at least what Penn State has shown to be able to kind of control that. Now, the second reason I think this is a dangerous matchup for Indiana is, again, what has given Indiana trouble in its past road games? Early foul trouble for Juwan Morgan. It happened against Arkansas. It happened against Duke. Lamar Stevens, again, he's using 31% of possessions. He draws 6.5 fouls per 40 minutes, which is a lot. That's 102nd in the country. I mean, it's one of the best in the country. And so, who's going to guard Lamar Stevens? I don't think Juwan Morgan should guard Lamar Stevens. This obviously assumes that Juwan Morgan is healthy and playing, simply because you cannot afford for Juwan Morgan to pick up fouls. But it's really hard to guard Lamar Stevens without fouling him, because 40% of his possessions are spot-up or isolation situations. So, a lot of the isolations are drives. Obviously, it can be tough to defend a good driver without fouling him. And 25% of his possessions have been, post-ups or transition. What's interesting is that he's been lethally efficient in the post-up and the transition possessions. He's just been okay in the spot-up isolation possessions, even though they make up about double the possessions that he's using. So, you kind of want him to be a driver. You want him to be a spot-up shooter. When he's getting the ball down on the block, he's really being effective. So, to me, given how much he's handling the ball, how good he is at drawing fouls, how foul-prone Juwan is, I don't think you can put Juwan on Lamar Stevens, even though that seems like the obvious matchup. I think you've got to put Juwan. I think you got to put Justin Smith on him when Lamar Stevens is playing the 4, which he does about 60% of the time, because they have a couple of centers in Josh Harrar and now Mike Watkins coming back. And then I think, when Lamar Stevens is in there playing center, which is when he's going to be more likely probably to be in the post, get Duran on him, who is a pretty good post defender. And look, I think if Lamar is going to become a shooter, you want to let him shoot. If he's making his jump shots, you probably tip your cap and you're going to lose the game. But I think, you're going to be less likely to foul him, especially if Juwan's on him, and he just hasn't been as efficient at that. So, but Juwan can't get into early foul trouble. So I hope Archie resists the urge to put Juwan on Lamar Stevens. I can't imagine that he will. And the third thing that Indiana has struggled with that Penn State is going to give him some problems with is turnovers. Penn State is 49th in the country in forcing turnovers. They force turnovers on 22% of opponents' possessions. Their guards are excellent at generating steals, none more so than Josh Reeves, who was one of the best in the Big Ten at generating steals last year. He's right there again. I would be shocked if Josh Reeves doesn't draw the matchup on Romeo, which is going to be an excellent test for Romeo because Josh Reeves is a really good defender. So our guards have to take care of the ball because Penn State will really take advantage if we don't. Now, granted, on the flip side of that, Penn State has some young guards. They're kind of middle of the pack in turnovers, and we've shown that we can really turn teams over too. But in that Arkansas game and in that Duke game, we saw how disruptive the turnovers were to us being able to get in any type of flow. So when you just look at what Indiana struggled with on the road, Penn State provides a lot of those challenges. And so for Indiana to go in and do something different in this game than they have done in their other road games, they're going to have to be more efficient offensively. They're granted, I think this game is going to be a slog, and I think Indiana can hold Penn State to under a point per possession. But I think you've got to look at that 1 point per possession line as kind of a benchmark. And Indiana hasn't hit that in any of its road games, and Penn State's been holding teams under that in its home games. And so a big part of Indiana being able to do that is keeping Juwan on the court and not turning it over. So hopefully, based on how they use Juwan defensively and based on our guards being more prepared for Penn State's defense and more prepared to play on the road, we'll be able to mitigate those issues that we've seen in the past. If not, Penn State probably wins this game. Now, what can Indiana take advantage of? Penn State has not been an especially deep team so far this year. They only play their bench about 25% of minutes, but that's starting to change because Mike Watkins is back. And he's one of the best rebounders, one of the best shot blockers in the country, so that's changing up their rotations a little bit. So you can't really take what you've seen from them so far this year in terms of their rotation, in terms of their bench depth, because it's obviously stronger with him. Where you take advantage of Penn State is that they are not that good offensively. They are currently 100th in the country in offensive efficiency. They have been better at home than they've been on the road, but what they really profile as right now is a team that takes a lot of threes but doesn't make a lot. Almost 43% of their field goal attempts are three-pointers. That's almost half, but they're only making 31% of their threes. That's 248th in the country. All right, now again, they've shot it better at home, but it's still not great. It's been like 31%, 32%. That kind of thing. They're not a team that generates a lot of assists. They're only 278th in assists. So they don't get great ball movement. They don't have one guy who's really going to create. It's a lot of isolation. It's a lot of one-on-one stuff. So Indiana's going to have to pressure the ball, be ready to help. It would seem like the pack line defense is really well suited to defend a perimeter like Penn State's. Okay, but what Indiana's going to have to do is rebound, because Penn State is good at generating offense from offensive rebounds. They're in the top 100 in the country in offensive rebounds. We have been a good defensive rebounding team all season, so that's kind of strength against strength. We need to hold our own there, because if you can limit Penn State to one shot on the offensive end, they're not shooting a very good percentage. Their effective field goal percentage is 48.7%. You're really going to hurt their offense. And then it's really, really important to get back in transition. Penn State has feasted this year in transition. They're scoring 1.27 points per possession. That's in the 96th percentile in the country. When you make them play in the half court, they're scoring 0.82 points per possession. That's 22. That's in the 22nd percentile. So you got to get back. You've got to make them a half court team, because that is one of the most drastic splits in the country. And if you can do that and play solid half court defense, you're going to be able to limit their offensive opportunities. But, Indiana on the road is going to have to be a little more attentive, a little bit more energetic on the defensive end to make sure that they're getting back and limiting those opportunities. And then, as good as Penn State's defense is, they're not a juggernaut. They have their issues. They're not great at defending 2-point field goals. They're 224th in the country. That's good for Indiana, because Indiana is one of the best 2-point field goal shooting teams in the country at 60%, in large part because Juwan Morgan is so good down low and because Romeo Langford is so good at finding space. So there should be opportunities there for Indiana to get the kind of shots that they want. A few play types Indiana may want to consider. Number one, ball screens. And I think, to me, this, and we'll talk about with this to Ben about this as we move forward, but I think Indiana needs to use the ball screen more. Indiana has been pretty good so far this year in ball screens, but we're only running them on about 10% of possessions. Romeo Langford has excellent numbers when he is, the man with the ball in pick and roll situations, and Juwan has been excellent as the screener. So it really seems like it would make sense to put the two of them in more ball screen actions. And Penn State, while they've been above average or good or even excellent in defending a lot of offensive actions, they're below average so far this year in their ball screen defense. Al Durham is another guy who was excellent leading pick and rolls last year, another guy that you may want to consider putting in that action with Juwan Morgan or even Justin Smith, both guys who have been very good as the screener in those situations. And Penn State, despite having Mike Watkins, has not been very good this year at defending post-ups. Now, part of that is because Watkins has only played 2 games, so I think they'll be better about, on this moving forward. But Indiana, again, really good in post-ups, so I think you'll see Indiana, for as long as Juwan Morgan is out there and able to play, dump it into him and use some of that, hey, let's dump it into Juwan type offense. And I think Indiana can get some good shots out of that, whether it's Juwan taking it himself or locating cutters or shooters. So excuse me, there are some things that Indiana is going to be able to take advantage of, but they've got to get past the big stuff first. They've got to keep Juwan Morgan on the court. They've got to limit the turnovers. They've got to get back in transition. Some of these things that Archie has harped on game after game after game, they're going to be especially important in this matchup because of the opponent Indiana is playing. So I'm worried because we just haven't seen Indiana do those things consistently on the road. So expecting them to do it in this game is expecting to see something we haven't seen. Indiana is capable of it. Indiana has more talent. Indiana is certainly better offensively, and I'll stack Indiana's defense right up there with Penn State's. So I think Indiana, on a neutral court at home would win this game, but I'm worried about it on the road until we see this team play with a little bit more poise and a little bit more maturity on the road. So that's what I would say. I think it's going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight. I don't think it's going to be a real pretty game. We'll see. The last time, it came down to James Blackman Jr. having to hit a 3 there right at the end of the game. It may come down to that again. So we will see. But, here's what I think. I think if Indiana goes up there and they do some of these things, like they limit turnovers and Juwan stays out there and they're, able to take advantage of some of the opportunities Penn State will give them, and they get back in transition and they win this game, no matter what the score is, I think it's one to really feel good about, because we will probably have seen some things that we haven't seen yet this season that are going to be so important moving forward, especially when we hit that road gauntlet in the Big Ten in January. So I'm really hoping that's what we're able to talk about on the postgame show. If not, we're going to kind of be left with this, kind of empty, incomplete feeling, which is what we've had so far because we just haven't seen any of this stuff on the road. So it's a really big game for Indiana, a really big opportunity to right some of the wrongs of the last couple of road games. If Indiana does, I think they'll win. If they don't, they won't. So I guess the prediction really just hinges on if you think Indiana can do what they haven't done so far this year. I'm, as you know, I'm an optimist, so I will talk myself into them doing it by the time the game tips. But if you ask me why I'm worried about this game, why I think it's a dangerous matchup, that's the reason why. All right. I think that's everything. Really good comments in the chat today. Really appreciate everybody being here. And again, tomorrow night, Andy, Ryan, Coach will have the post-game show for you. So look for that after the game. But with that said, that will do it for us on this week's episode of Banner Monday. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, join us at assemblycall.com on Monday afternoons for the live broadcast of our Banner Monday recording. And you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter. It will make you a smarter and more well-informed IU basketball fan. Thank you for listening. We will talk to you tomorrow night after IU Penn State. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim. And go Hoosiers.
Thank everybody for coming out.
All right, I got to get out of here, folks. Thank you.
You weren't even here in the first place. All right. Good stuff. Thanks, everybody. Sorry, it's hard for me to, when I'm going off notes, it's hard for me to read and respond to the chat when it's just me. So that made an interesting game. Interesting game out there. All righty. So yes, go Hoosiers. They'll be there to talk with you Tuesday night. No halftime show, but then I'll be back. I'll pretty much be hosting all the shows for the foreseeable future, I think. So, but holidays are always a tricky time. We just, between Thanksgiving and the New Year, we just want to try and have two people there for every show. And if we can get past that, then as you all know, usually for the New Year, we've got 3-man teams for most of it. But all right, I'm going to go get this podcast posted. Thank you for being here, everybody. And we will talk to you all Tuesday night, tomorrow night.